The curious case of the wacky creationist. This is the first time I've made a video discussing another video, which itself refers to another one. But here we go. I'm going to talk about Kent Hovind's video, which is called Wacky an Atheist, and it's responding to a Freethought Matters video discussion between hosts Annie Laurie Gaylor and Dan Barker and the biologist Jerry Coyne about the evidence for evolution. And Kent is very clear about what he does on Wednesdays.
Wacky an Atheist Wednesday, we do every Wednesday. I wear red, like the bull to, antagonize them. I know bulls are colorblind.
As an atheist myself, I don't think I'm antagonized by him wearing red, but I'm not sure I want to be whacked. Thank you very much, Kent. Thank goodness it isn't Wednesday. I think of myself as a nice, respectful person. Whatever happened to courteous debate? I suppose you'll have guessed by now that I'm going to put the case for evolution. But why should I want to whack anyone in the process? It's odd, I thought I'd heard somewhere that creationists were wackos. I must have misunderstood because I thought that meant something completely different. Anyway, this isn't about winning or losing. It's about finding out what's true. If evolution really did happen, maybe we should have left all the primate politics, petty point scoring and winning and losing behind when we were monkeys, and humanity should concentrate on finding out what's true. But hey ho, that never happened. Kent is a young earth creationist, which means that he's read his Bible and believes
Man has only been here populating this planet for 4,400 years since Noah got off the ark.
and he thinks Adam and Eve were real people, evolution didn't happen, and that if we did accept it, that it would erode moral teaching. He thinks that those who believe in evolution are buying into a belief system. He thinks
We believe the Bible is true and evolution is the dumbest and most dangerous religion in the world. And it's nothing but a religion.
Is Kent right? I don't want to win this debate. I'm entirely happy to let you, the viewer, make up your own mind, like a jury based on the evidence that I'm going to present. I'll suggest that evolution happened and that there is no evidence against evolution, which I'm afraid does rather contradict what Kent is saying here.
No evidence against evolution. No, there's no evidence for it.
In the video, Kent sets out a series of questions that he wants to ask Jerry Coyne and challenges him to a debate. Coyne, I think, rightly declined, but that's okay because I'm going to answer most of the questions Kent wanted to ask. You might be wondering why Jerry Coyne declined Hovind's offer of a debate. Well, prominent evolutionary thinkers like him don't generally debate with creationists because they think it would be a waste of their time and effort, and if they agree to the debate, they think it would give an unscientific doctrine like creationism undue credibility. That does mean, of course, that creationists like Kent can crow loudly about the fact that people he calls evolutionists won't, and in his opinion can't, answer their questions. Well, I'm not a prominent biologist or a scientist, although I know a great deal about evolutionary theory, and I think I'll be able to present the evidence that will help to answer Kent's questions, at least some of them. I don't want to be too unkind to Kent because he has his beliefs and he's entitled to them, but bluntly, most of the questions are relatively easy to answer, although some are more complex and require more time than a short video can realistically cover. I'll come to that later. I should make it clear that I'm not acting in any capacity at all on behalf of Jerry Coyne. He doesn't know I'm making this video, although he might find out later. The approach I'll use to respond to Kent, therefore, will be my own, and it follows that this might be different from the way Jerry would have done it. So let's get started. Darwin likened his discovery of the theory of evolution by natural selection to confessing a murder. And you might think that the evolution question is a bit of a whodunit. Who's responsible for the creation of the universe and humankind? God? Or, I suppose, Darwin? But at least in respect of the arguments Kent is putting, you'd be wrong. Imagine this scenario. You walk into a room and you find a dead body lying face down in a pool of blood. There's a knife embedded in the deceased person's back between the shoulder blades, and there's a hole in the centre of the back of the corpse's head. Someone has stepped in the blood and has left a trail of bloody footprints leading from the body towards the door. And as you later find out, there's a bullet buried in the brain of the victim. So, in the fine tradition of whodunit, you might think that the question is who committed the murder. But it isn't. The question of whether evolution happened parallels the question of whether there was a murder in the first place. There is a different branch of creationism, intelligent design, whose advocates accept that evolution happened and that the Earth is extremely ancient, but who think that the complexity of life could not have happened without the grand plan of some intelligent designer. Now, it slipped my mind, who could that have been? I'll let you work that out for yourself. But you get the picture. Working out who, if anyone, caused evolution to happen would be the whodunit question. Whether it happened at all is a different one and arguably a much simpler question to answer. The answer I would give to an intelligent design advocate, therefore, is different to the one I'm going to be talking about here. Now, if we go back to our suspicious death scenario, is it possible that the person was not murdered? Maybe they died of natural causes and a knife happened to fall from a shelf and land point down in the person's back. And maybe the bloody footprints were left by someone who was trying to help them but realised they were dead and left, leaving the footprints in the blood. But then what about the hole in the back of the alleged victim's skull? Well, maybe the knife landed on the poor unfortunate's head before bouncing off into his back. Doesn't really work that, does it? But what about the bullet in the brain? I think we'd all agree that that settles it. A murder has taken place. The point I'm trying to make here is that in certain scenarios, evidence is so overwhelming that it's impossible to draw any other conclusion but one. Now, if evolution happened, the evidence will be all around us, everywhere. Now, I can't hope to begin to give any decent coverage of all that evidence in this short video. If you wanted to find out more, you could read Jerry Coyne's book, Why Evolution is True, which I have down here. Or you could look at this one by Richard Dawkins, The Greatest Show on Earth. Or if you haven't got time to read these, you could listen to episode 2, What You Didn't Know You Knew, in my series of 8 ad-free podcasts, Not 42, The Real Meaning of Life, the Universe and Everything, which you can get from my website at www.peterdfisher.com. I'll put the links below. For this short video, I can't hope to do much more than find a bullet in the brain, or maybe a couple of them. As it happens, I've been interested in wildlife, and especially birds, all my life. Now let's see what Kent says about birds.
There's 366 varieties of hummingbirds. How many knew that? Talk about useless knowledge. They might have had a common ancestor called a hummingbird. That does not prove hummingbirds are related to dinosaurs and pine trees and ladybugs and worms. I don't know how you guys can't get this. I need a bigger hammer, Joseph. They're not getting it. I try to knock some sense into them. Common sense, science. So somebody sent me a bigger hammer. Here we go. That will knock some sense into a couple of them. But in case that doesn't work, we will bring out the big one.
I'm getting really worried here, Kent. I'm so glad it isn't Wednesday. So, Kent agrees that there can be different kinds of birds, but only within one kind of bird. For example, there are ducks and there are geese. A duck can't be a goose and a goose can't be a duck. So, members of the jury, here's Exhibit 1. Is this bird, the Brent, a goose or a duck? Very big for a duck and a bit small for a goose. Come on, Kent, if you're watching, which is it? Duck or goose? Take as much time as you want. All birds, indeed all living things, seem to fit into categories. Everything seems related in some way to every other. Now I can hear Kent screaming at this point that this proves nothing. All that it's showing is that living things are ordered in a certain way. God could have just decided to sort them in that way, and Kent would actually be right. This is evidence for evolution in the sense that the organisation in nature is exactly the kind we'd expect if evolution had happened, and if it wasn't ordered in the way it was, the evolution question would never have come up. But it is circumstantial, not conclusive. It's not the bullet in the brain that I'm going to need if I'm to prove my case. In the video, Kent tells Jerry Coyne that
the fossil record, there is no fossil record, Jerry. There are fossils, no question.
This is just flat wrong. Now, what was it Kent said about science?
Common sense, science.
And it is common sense to say that new rock layers will always form on top of older ones. New sediments form on top of existing rocks. And when lava erupts from a volcano, it usually flows over the top of the rocks that are already there. Not always, but it usually does. I've been doing some research on the geology in the Lake District just to the north of where I live just lately because I was thinking about making a video about how we know the Earth is of a great age. The English Lake District is a national park in the far northwest of the country, and for me it's the loveliest place in England. I've found that the bedrock where I live is sandstone from the Permian and Triassic periods. Below that there are limestones from the Carboniferous. There don't appear to be many rocks from the Devonian period which came before that around here, but there are some further north on the other side of the Lake District. There are also layers of mudstones and shales from the still earlier Silurian period, and oldest of all in this region we find volcanic rocks and ancient seabed layers from the Ordovician period. There are probably much older rocks buried deeper in the crust, such as the ones from the Cambrian or the Precambrian, but if they're there, they're not exposed on the surface where we can see them. Each of these other layers, though, are exposed on the surface in different parts of the Lake District because of erosion and seismic action. We don't happen to have much from the Jurassic in this region and none at all from the Cretaceous. These seem to have eroded away, as have most of the youngest rocks of all from the Cenozoic. To find these rocks you need to look in other parts of the world. Kent doesn't say in the video how old he thinks the Earth is, except that he says mankind has been here for 4,400 years. Although I think I'm right in saying he doesn't believe in the deep time that's necessary for evolution to have happened. So how can we be sure that the Earth is as ancient as I'm suggesting? There are methods of measuring how old rocks are, and I'll come back to that. But during my research on the geology of the Lake District, I came across this book, Cumbria Rocks, about the geology of Cumbria, where the Lake District is. I contacted the author, Ian Jackson, a retired professional geologist, and he sent me this picture, which I wanted to show you. Look at the incredible complex layering, the stratification in this picture. He took it at a quarry in Cumbria, and you might be forgiven for thinking this is a section through all the layers of rocks I've been talking about, with perhaps the older Ordovician layers at the bottom and the newer ones from, say, the Triassic at the top. But it isn't. All these rocks are from just one geological period, the Carboniferous. This limestone is made up of coral, dirt and sand that accumulated on the bottom of a warm tropical sea when Cumbria must have been a lot warmer than it is now. How long do you think it would take for all this coral to grow and all these layers to build up at the bottom of the sea? Although you can't see the quarry in this picture, it has been cut into this. It's a limestone outcrop called Farleton Knot, which is 600 feet high. And it's made entirely of ancient seabed. If you've ever travelled north on the M6 towards Scotland, it might look familiar. It towers above the motorway on the right just as you enter Cumbria. So however old Kent thinks the Earth is, it would be wrong for him to say that rocks are not organised into layers. But that doesn't seem to be quite what he's saying.
There's all kinds of animals are found in all kinds of layers, and you guys date the layers by the fossils and the fossils by the layers.
But if each of these layers of rock have their own fossil assemblage, isn't that a fossil record? If there weren't different fossils in different stratigraphic layers, how could scientists use them for dating? Which kind of contradicts what he's saying here.
The fact that we have fossils at all is proof of a flood.
You can't get away with that one, Kent. One flood, one layer of fossils, not multiple layers. But of course, as I suggested before, scientists don't date rocks by fossils alone. What Kent doesn't mention in his video is radiometric dating. Maybe he doesn't understand it, and to be fair, understanding this does seem to need some effort. Different radioactive isotopes decay at known rates, so scientists can date rocks according to the proportions of different isotopes in them. This is solidly rooted in hard science. It involves the known laws of physics. Radioactive decay can be measured and rock layers can be dated to within a reasonable margin of error. And geologists say that the age of the rocks in the Lake District span almost 500 million years. And each geological period has its own fossils. For example, the only dinosaur fossils that have ever been found were in rocks from the Triassic, Jurassic and Cretaceous periods. The animals we find in earlier rocks are quite different. And when we get to the very earliest rocks, scientists haven't been able to find any fossils at all. And for much of the Earth's history before the Cambrian, the only fossil evidence is for microbial life. That is, except for the very late Precambrian, the Ediacaran, where we find strange, simple organisms that might be animals or plants or something else entirely. According to Kent, one animal cannot be born from another.
There's no evidence of any animal ever producing something other than their same kind. Ever. No farmer on the planet, in the history of the planet, has seen a cow produce a non-cow, or a frog produce a non-frog, or a dog produce a non-dog.
Hooray! I've finally found something I can agree with Kent about. Of course, no cow ever produced a non-cow, but even Kent wouldn't say that every cow is exactly the same. And if one cow had, say, slightly longer horns and they were useful to it so that, say, it was able to protect itself from a lion, it survived and then went on to reproduce, this adaptation will be passed on to its offspring preferentially. This is called natural selection, and if the Earth is incredibly ancient, there will be plenty of time for much more extensive changes in organisms to have taken place. If so, we should be able to find fossils midway between different animal kinds. We can think of these as our bullets in the brain. Now it's time to present Exhibit 2, and this I'm going to claim is my first bullet in the brain. Meet Archaeopteryx, a fossil found not in the Lake District but in Jurassic deposits in Germany. Kent says there are kinds of animals. There are the bird kind and the dinosaur kind. So which is Archaeopteryx? It's got a bird's wings, feathers and bird's legs, but it's got claws on its wings and a long bony tail like a dinosaur. Next time you buy a chicken or turkey from the supermarket, just see if you can find a long bony tail. It also has jaws with teeth in them. So bird or dinosaur? And then there's Exhibit 3, the Tiktaalik. This fossil was found in Devonian rocks, deposits usually found much deeper and therefore much older than the Jurassic ones. No one's ever found a dinosaur or an Archaeopteryx in rocks of the Devonian age. In fact, no land-living tetrapods, four-limbed land animals, at all. Lots of fish of various kinds, but no vertebrate land animals. Is Tiktaalik a fish or a land-living amphibian? Or might it perhaps be the ancestor of all living tetrapods, amphibians, reptiles, dinosaurs, birds and mammals, like you and me? And the final bullet in the brain I'm going to present was found in rocks from much deeper in time, the Cambrian period. Rocks older than any of the exposed ones in Cumbria. In British Columbia, huge numbers of fossils were found in deposits known as the Burgess Shale. And by large numbers, I mean very large numbers. As I understand it, tens of thousands of fossils of tiny sea creatures were found, exquisitely preserved. There's no evidence for any life on land at all during this period. Here's a reconstruction of the Cambrian world. There's massive evidence for life in the oceans at that time. We know what was living there. Hang on though, just a minute, if this is the sea, where are all the fish? Maybe that's a question someone could put to Kent. No fish have ever been found in these deposits unless you count ones like this. This is Metasprigina, which would have been about 4 inches, 10 centimetres long. But is it a fish? There's no fins, scales, no jaws or teeth, no bones, at least not the white bony kind we find in most fish today, although it might have had some made of cartilage. In fact, a casual observer might think this is some kind of worm, but it isn't. This creature had a notochord, which is a kind of spinal cord, although Metasprigina didn't have a spine, so we can't really call it that. It's a nerve bundle which tracks along the length of the animal. No worms ever had a notochord. This animal belongs to the phylum Chordata, which comprises of all the fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds and mammals. So, is it a fish? Just look at the pattern of musculature on its side. Where have you seen that before? In the heading of the paper that described this animal, the paleontologist Simon Conway Morris did call it a fish, so maybe we could just stick with that. It's a fish, if not a very fishy one. Is this simple creature, or one like it, the ancestor of true fish? What do you think, members of the jury? A bullet in the brain, or not? Now, let me think. What might Kent say about the evidence I've just shown you? If evolution didn't happen, there should be no Archaeopteryx. Now, I don't know much about what Kent thinks about this, and I don't want to put words into his mouth, but he either has to say that the Archaeopteryx doesn't exist, I might have something to say about that later, or it's a fake. But which one's the forgery? There was a claim that the first Archaeopteryx that was found was a forgery, but when the scientists looked closer they found it couldn't have been faked, not in the way that people were suggesting anyway. As I understand it, there have been about a dozen Archaeopteryx specimens found so far. The first one in 1861 and the latest in 2010, which would mean that if they were all fakes, the forger would have been active over a remarkably long period. I did a check on a different creationist website to see what they were saying about Archaeopteryx, and to be fair to them, they did agree that the fossils were genuine, although they decided that Archaeopteryx was a bird that God had made with unusual features, teeth, and that they became extinct in the Great Flood. They completely ignored the fact that Archaeopteryx's skeleton is pretty well indistinguishable from small ground living dinosaurs that were around at the time. I also think that Kent will probably tell you not to look at the pictures I've shown you. He might just say that these are just artistic impressions that have been produced by atheist evolutionist propaganda. It's true that we can't be sure that, for example, Metasprigina looked exactly like the picture I showed you. There are things like colours that can't always be inferred from fossils, but the representation of the animal in the picture doesn't have fins because the fossil didn't have any. The muscle arrangements you can see are called myomeres, and they're also found in modern fish. They were found in the fossil, otherwise they wouldn't be represented in the picture. And I happen to know that Simon Conway Morris, who led the team that described this animal, was not an atheist. Not all scientists are. Evolution happened or it didn't. Either I'm right or Kent is. But let's put science to one side for a moment, because Kent does raise some interesting and important philosophical questions. There seems to be a legitimate concern about deeply felt human intuitive feelings here. Kent wants to say that the people he calls evolutionists absurdly think that all life on Earth came from a rock.
You believe you came from a rock. Aaron Ross says nobody believes that. All of you believe that. I show it over and over and over. The Earth was a hot ball of molten rock 4.6 billion years ago, wasn't it, Jerry? Then it cooled off for millions and millions of years, and then it began to rain on the rock for millions of years, and the puddles gathered that had organic molecules floating around, or had molecules floating around that became organic. And so you came from a rock.
No, Kent, we didn't come from rock. Everything's made of atoms that connect in different ways. The way they connect is called chemistry. Rocks come from inorganic chemistry and living things from organic chemistry. All living things are made of cells that are themselves made of organic chemicals. But in another part of the video, Kent mentions that Hitler drew on evolutionary ideas. On this point, he's right. In the 19th and early 20th century, some vicious right-wing bigots used a corrupted vision of Darwinism to justify some abhorrent behaviour, which did feed into Nazism. I discussed this deplorable misuse of Darwinism in episode 6 of my podcast series, Diving into Deep Nature. But then religion has also frequently been misused to generate cruelty, oppression, war and discrimination, even today. Kent says that if we accept that evolution happened, it legitimates abortion. It doesn't, but he's right that an evolutionary perspective has profound and far-reaching implications for the way we think about what it is to be human and for what it means to be a non-human animal. But these questions take us into complex matters of human origins, meaning and social attitudes that are too involved to be discussed here. I made my podcast to discuss these issues. That's what they do. Kent says that evolution is a religion.
Evolution is a religion.
Okay, let's have some fun. Sorry about this, Kent. Kent thinks he comes from Alabama.
And in Lenox, Alabama. Come on down. It's beautiful down here.
No, he doesn't. Alabama is supposed to be in the United States. I don't believe in America. Don't look at me like that. I've never been to America. I've never seen it. There is no evidence for America. Canada, yes, I've got friends who live there. And that's where the Burgess Shale fossils were found. But I mean, come on, seriously? Who could believe there's a country that would elect Donald Trump as its president? Okay, that was my little joke. The point of this is that, of course, America is real. That's if we can say anything at all is real. Listen to my episode 1 podcast, The Absolute Truth. America is part of Kent's lived reality. I have no doubt that he sees the evidence for America wherever he goes. And it's part of my lived reality too, even if I only experience it indirectly through television, books, films and so on. If America isn't a religion, what about evolution? The point I'm making is that evolution is part of my lived reality. I see evidence for the great age of the earth and evolution everywhere I go. Some of the civic buildings near where we live are built using red Triassic sandstone laid down when this part of the world was a hot desert. How do we know that? Because the desert is still here. Look at the layering and dune shapes in this rock. I've got a piece of it here in my hand. Come and have a look. See the layering? And look what I found. I just broke this piece of stone off. That's been embedded in it. A piece of harder stone that's been wind blown and rounded into that shape. Let's just see if we can break a piece off. See? It's made of sand. Compacted sand. Maybe a dinosaur stepped in this sand. Not T-Rex. They evolved later. But the early Triassic dinosaurs might have done. And not too far from here, dinosaur tracks have been found in this exact same kind of rock. So how do we know this sandstone doesn't come from a beach? These deposits surround the Lake District Mountains, which are older than these sandstones. So the mountains would have been there when the desert formed. But they aren't just found round here. They have them as far east as Germany and as far west as Arizona. During the Triassic, Europe and America were joined together as part of a great supercontinent called Pangaea, which had a vast desert in its centre. That piece of sandstone with the little inclusion, the pebble that looks flattened and rounded by decades of wind-driven sandblasting on the surface of an ancient desert, came from close to the bottom of this disused quarry near where I live. And if this part of the world was once a hot desert for a very long time in the Triassic, and before that the bed of an ancient warm sea for a very long time during the Carboniferous, and this represents only 2 geological periods out of many, It doesn't seem to me that this is consistent with the flood story and the Young Earth Creationists' timetable of about 6,000 years for the age of the Earth. And there's more. Driving eastwards between our town and the motorway, the road cuts through grey Silurian rocks, and I know that there are many layers of Silurian rock in different parts of the Lake District. Further on our journey, we see massive outcrops of white limestone like this one, Whitbarrow Scar, and as we've already heard, Foulton Knot, both of which have been heaved out of the ground by earthquakes when this part of the world was seismically active. We don't get earthquakes of any significance here now. In this part of the world we call hills and mountains fells, and this fell, Black Combe, just a dozen or so miles north of where I live, is made of much older, darker rock from the Ordovician period, which dates from between 485 and 443 million years ago. We know from the fossils in the rock that it used to be the bed of a cold, deep ocean. How long do you think it would have taken for those sediments to have built up to this height? But the rock isn't sedimentary, not now. It's metamorphic, which means that at some time in its history, the sediments have been altered by heat and pressure produced by an immense weight of rock above it. Rock which is no longer there. It's been eroded away by wind, rain, ice penetration, and it's been cut by rivers, great glaciers, and vast ice sheets over hundreds of millions of years. Poor Black Combe looks old, worn and rounded, because it is old. New mountain ranges don't look like this or the other Lake District fells. Oh no, they look like this. These are the Andean mountains in Chile, which are still forming. I don't want to get too technical, but they are growing as a result of a process called subduction, the same process that would have caused the uplift of the Lake District mountains in the Ordovician. I think it's hard for anyone to get their heads around the idea of great mountain chains weathering away when all any of us have got is an eye blink of time on this planet. Especially when people might not live near a region that's as geologically expressive of its long history as the Lake District is. But for me, the evidence for the great age of the Earth is as clear as it can be. But what about the evidence for evolution? I say more about this in episode 2, but I see the relationships between living things every day, everywhere I look. And yes, I took this picture of a Brent for this video. As you can see, I need a new telephoto lens. The reason I chose the Archaeopteryx and the Burgess Shale as my bullets in the brain is because I saw some of the Burgess Shale fossils in the Oxford Museum of Natural History. They weren't very impressive at first sight. The fossils look like small, insignificant stains in the rock, but when you get close you can see the remarkable fineness and exquisite detail. You can see every leg and antenna perfectly preserved. These fossils might not be large, but they are truly stunning. And I've seen the Archaeopteryx on a private arranged visit to the Natural History Museum in London while researching a scene for a novel. It wasn't this specimen, which is kept in Berlin, it was this one. But I saw the claws on its wings. I saw the feather impressions. I saw the long bony tail and the teeth in its jaws with my own eyes. These eyes. Evolution's part of my lived reality, just as America is part of Kent Hovind's. And I know with equivalent levels of certainty that evolution happened. That's why I would never say I believe in evolution. I'm no more an evolutionist than Kent is an Americaist. I know evolution happened. Now, the evidence I shall give, the evidence I have given, might be thought of as being a bit self-indulgent. I've emphasised some of the things I personally know about and have seen for myself, and I've left out a lot of other stuff. But even if you think that Kent is right,
there's no evidence for it.
The fossil record is only a small part of the total evidence for the fact of evolution. In fact, you could show that evolution happened without even looking at it. DNA evidence is often accepted in court as proof of someone's guilt. When the DNA evidence came in, it clearly supported the relationship between all living things. And beyond that, there's more evidence from biogeography, comparative anatomy, comparative physiology and embryology, although Kent does deny a lot of this evidence too. As Jerry Coyne puts it in his book, there are thousands of times evolution could have been proved wrong. It never has. Evolution is not scientific theory, it's scientific fact. Scientists don't just believe evolution happened, they accept it because there's no other way of interpreting the evidence. If evolution hadn't happened, this world just wouldn't look the way it does. That's why scientists don't debate with creationists. There's nothing to debate. Science may not know everything, it certainly doesn't, but it has established some things to be true. There are innumerable lines of evidence that evolution happened, and none that I'm aware of that disprove it. And let's face it, if anyone came up with convincing evidence that it hadn't happened, it'd be massive news. We'd all know. Now, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it's time for me to summarise my case against Kent Hovind's Young Earth Creationism. In our murder scenario, I propose 6 lines of evidence to show that a murder had taken place. The body, the knife, the hole in the back of the head, the bullet in the brain, the pool of blood and the footprints. Only 6. If we are to consider fossils like Archaeopteryx, Tiktaalik and Metasprigina to be transitional between animal kinds, and you agree that we can think of them as bullets in the brain, they certainly aren't the only ones. The fossil record looks like it's being machine gunned with other transitional fossils, all aimed and hit exactly where we would expect to find them, including the hominins, creatures or people that appear to be midway between apes and modern humans. Their fossils are found in some of the Earth's newest rocks, ones that are less than 7 million years old. The story of human evolution is a complex one, but there's a clear trend from less prognathic, which means less pushed out faces and smaller brain sizes, to more modern looking flat faces and larger brain sizes through time. Kent rests his case essentially on 2 points. He says that we could never claim evolution happened unless we actually saw one kind of organism change into another one. But if I saw an owl morph into an ostrich before my eyes, or a cow give birth to a crocodile, this would not prove evolution. It would be evidence for God because it would be a miracle. The evidence suggests that large evolutionary changes take place over very long periods of geological time, so we would never see it happening the way he thinks. Comparing this to our murder scenario, it's like he's saying, well, never mind the bullet in the brain. Unless someone actually saw the murder happen, it didn't happen. Now, I find this to be special pleading. He wants evolution to be false, so he appeals to an impossible standard of proof to support his case. His second point is a much stronger one. People find such massive change extremely counterintuitive. It's very hard to believe that human beings evolved out of something as simple as biochemistry. And why would biochemistry be there in the first place if there weren't some grand plan? But it's also hard to believe that the Earth is as old as the evidence tells us it is. And this would give time for slow incremental changes to build into the incredible richness and complexity we see around us. We may have strong, deeply felt human intuitive instincts that we, human beings, couldn't be the product of natural forces. And this takes us to perhaps one of the profoundest philosophical questions of all. Are these intuitions telling us something about reality, or are they just telling us something about the way we think as human beings? Kent is entitled to his beliefs, and many think that deeply held faith is to be admired. He says that the wonders of nature are evidence of God. But this isn't empirical evidence, it isn't science. The fact that evolution happened does not prove there is no God, nor even that there is no Christian God. Although it does strongly suggest that the version of creation in Genesis is just another origin myth. I called this video The Curious Case of the Wacky Creationist, and I'm curious about what we should think about creationism. Creationists aren't truth seekers. I've debated with many of them online, and they almost never listen to episode 2 of my podcast when I invite them to, which is where I present the evidence. Their beliefs seem to be deeply held, profound and precious to them, and they seem to be very resistant to revise their positions. On the other hand, I think it's questionable whether it's acceptable for Kent to mislead his viewers, listeners and visitors to his website by saying there's no evidence for evolution, when the evidence is all around us everywhere. Which isn't to say that Kent is deliberately deceiving people. It may just be that he simply doesn't want to see any evidence that contradicts his worldview. Kent sounds like he's sincere, and he may genuinely and honestly believe it when he says,
There's no evidence for it.
But you could argue that this video isn't about Kent Hovind, and even less about me. I'm not a scientist. It doesn't matter what I think. It's really about two things: you, the viewer, and truth. I often come across people who think that there are no truths and everything is belief. Maybe you're one of them. But the idea that all knowledge is belief leads to absurdity, because it would mean that none of us would know what our names are or where we live. We would just believe those things. We wouldn't know that if we went for a walk in the park that we wouldn't fall up and land on the moon. We know these kinds of truths because of the empirical evidence that supports them. The same method I've used to know evolution happened. So, I'm really asking you how you form your beliefs. Do you follow those you imbibed as a child? Or do you get them from intuitive instincts about what you feel must be true? Do you get them from your holy book? Or do you find them using evidence, reason, science, and what you see and experience around you? Creationism has its own very well-funded, slick and sophisticated misinformation industry dedicated to undermining mainstream evolutionary narratives, using tired old tropes that fall apart when they're subjected to the slightest scrutiny of people who understand the process of evolution, which I've only touched on very sketchily in this video. Some might say that Kent Hovind is a scammer, but he certainly seems to believe what he's saying, so I prefer to think that he's been scammed. Creationism isn't about finding the best explanation for what truth might be. That's science's job. It's about promoting a particular narrow belief system. And, as I've implied, we do all have the right to our beliefs. The alternative to that will be someone dictating truth as they do in places like Russia, Afghanistan and North Korea. But with rights come responsibilities. And I think one of those responsibilities is to find out what's true. For me, truth is important. Evolution happened or it didn't. Don't we have a duty to know what truth is? I don't want to buy into a belief system that's based on falsehood. How about you? So, I've presented my case for evolution. It's time for you to retire and consider your verdict. No winners, no losers. It's your call. But I do need to warn you that if you do accept that evolution happened, Kent Hovind might just think that you're an idiot.
Wake up. Don't follow idiots like this who believe they came from a rock.
Just so you know. I'm just glad it isn't Wednesday. Thanks for watching.